Hello there. Welcome to 1% Better. It's Friday, and that's the day I release these episodes pretty much mostly. You might not be aware what day it is, what time it is, where you are, other than the fact that you're at home. But just to remind you, it's another week nearly over, and hopefully that's another few days closer to getting into a rhythm or routine that you were used to before or close to it. Hopefully podcasts are still part of your routine, if not even more part of your routine now that we have a bit more time on our own, on our hands, potentially. And I hope you're enjoying these episodes. So this week's episode is a prelude, I suppose, to the emotional intelligence series that I'm going to be releasing in the next couple of weeks. That series, by the way, that I'm recording on for a long time now and have a lot of episodes ready to go. I've landed on a title. It's called, or I'm calling it, Me, Myself, and EI. And the EI is for emotional intelligence. So me, myself, and EI, a big emphasis on self, and obviously EI, emotional intelligence. So let me know what you think of that. Hopefully it makes sense. I want to get something punchy that people might wonder what that is about, and then check it out. That's the goal. So love to hear if you think that's a good title. That's what I've landed on after lots of pieces of feedback from others and advice. It was actually the first thing I came up with, and I deviated away from it, and now I'm back there again. Funny how that happens. But anyway, this week's episode is a kind of a prelude to the show, to the series, because it is predominantly about emotional intelligence, adaptability, building self-awareness, assessing your adaptability. And it is with none other than Declan O'Connell. Been connected with Declan for the last few years. He has a master's in psychology. He is an executive coach. He is a consultant focusing in on high performance for individuals and teams. And as you'll hear, he loves developing people in individual and teams settings. We had a really, really good chat. He came to my studio here, first person that's been in it since it's properly been done up, and we had a face-to-face conversation. Sometimes they're definitely the best in person. This was recorded probably a week or two before the COVID-19 takeoff here in Ireland, so we were still able to talk to each other in person, and we didn't have to practice social distancing, although we were probably 2 meters apart. I really learned a lot from this. I took a copious amount of notes from the listen back and from the edit, and they're in the show notes, so you can check that out. Talking about adaptability, humility, curiosity, key areas of focus for developing high performance in individuals and teams. Lots of tools Declan shares. He's a consultant for Mindflick, and they have a profiling tool called Spotlight, which I was actually hoping to go on the training at the end of March, but that got cancelled thanks to coronavirus, but we'll get to do it again in the future. If you're interested in high performance, if you're interested in personal and professional development and how you could do that for yourself and for your teams, you're going to take out some really interesting stuff from this. Terms and concepts and theories that I hadn't heard of before, and I hope you'll enjoy listening to it. As always, if you could, I'd be really appreciative if you rated the show, reviewed the show on whatever app you listen to it on, potentially join our 1% Better Slack community on Slack, where we communicate and chat, and I'm hoping to do some kind of live Q&A stuff on that in the near future. And if you have feedback, suggestions, other guests, topics that you'd like to hear me cover, I will absolutely focus on that. Excited about episodes coming up over the next while, and this one definitely sets the bar high, and it is all about high performance after all. Best of luck, and enjoy the conversation with Declan O'Connell. Good luck.
Welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of 1% Better, well into season 4. I have a very special guest in my studio today, first person physically recording in the studio with me since I put this properly together. So Declan O'Connell, welcome to 1% Better, to whatever this place is. I guess I don't have a name for it yet.
Oh, thanks a million. Great to be here in such luxurious surroundings, Rob. Yeah. Very impressed.
Very, very delighted to have you. And as you're sitting under a lamp that has kind of a spotlight on it, it kind of is perfect fitting for some of the stuff we're going to talk about today in the area you work in.
Absolutely.
So as I said, it's emotional intelligence, and I think there's so much involved in that about leadership, team performance, high performance, performing under pressure, adaptability.
Yes.
that's a lot of the stuff you kind of focus on. So maybe give us an introduction to kind of the areas you work on at the moment, things you're passionate about, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, so hugely passionate, Rob, about people and performance. Now, I could give it the Instagram-friendly job description that I help people realise their potential.
Okay.
But I find
unlocking potential.
Yes,
is it?
yeah. I find it a bit ethereal, though. I don't think that people can connect with it.
Right.
Some people think it's quite a notional thing. Other people don't want to go near their potential. So I suppose I try to help people solve problems. Right. And that's how I try to describe it, because no matter who you are, whether you believe in that psychology piece or not, everybody comes up against problems. And so I try to help people and teams solve problems. Underpinning all that is emotional intelligence. So knowing that when you are struggling with a problem, you're just looking at it through the wrong lens. So can you help develop people and teams try on different lenses to see if you can unlock that problem?
Right.
And that's principally my role and what I do.
Very good. And have you found that approach, that way of kind of explaining what you do, changed a lot from when you came out a few years ago doing that? I know we've been talking about in the past, but coming out, blinding people with science, maybe with emotional intelligence is the key. People just don't want to hear that sometimes, maybe, is it?
No, massively. And I suppose there's been a huge amount of iterations in terms of my introduction, in terms of what I do, because the word psychology scares a lot of people. Emotional intelligence scares a lot of people because it's not quite tangible.
Right.
And it's interesting because I think once you can get that tangible benefit for people, then they'll buy in.
Okay.
It's almost that piece of what's in it for me.
Right.
So to explore these scientific concepts and research-based papers around emotional intelligence, it's still kind of up in the air a bit, but can we bring it back down to your context and help you physically and tangibly solve one of your problems? Then you get that buy-in.
Right. So I'll rename the series of emotional intelligence to What's in it for you, maybe, because it might absolutely, I'm learning about how to help people better as well. And sometimes you can come in at a kind of an angle that very well, but it's not easily transferable to just everybody, Yeah.
And inherent in that is actually emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
So knowing what communication will land with somebody and what won't land. So you and me, Rob, probably have a preference of being so excited by the latest research in emotional intelligence. If you go to somebody and blind them with all this new exciting research, they're lost already. So it's a case of, can you actually simplify it? And that actually is the greatest sophistication, as the quote goes. So I think that is the real expertise that we can bring to people.
Very interesting. You're pulling me up on my low EQ already there. I'm joking. So of the areas you're focused on, right, there's, I think, looking at your site, there's 4 main areas. Consulting around performance development, high performance teams, and performance under pressure. Those are the 4 areas. Which are, I suppose, do you have a preference on any of those specifically as a kind of balance, and how did it evolve to get to those, maybe? Yeah,
so background, I suppose, to probably give you the whole journey. So like any young fella growing up in Cork, sports mad. So what did I pick in college? Something with the least amount of hours.
Right.
So, did commerce, 10 hours degree. Lovely. Allowed me to play sport for 4 years, and then I decided I wasn't ready to leave, so I did an extra master's degree in economics, and then wanted to play more sport, joined the bank. So a 9 to 5 job.
It's a very 1980s view of like kind of the world. From that point you have your,
and from my parents' generation, they were absolutely delighted. Good, solid, pensionable job.
Yes.
But always had that burning interest in people development, psychology, and that whole piece of mindset. And so initially it was through a sporting frame, but as my career developed in banking, it became about clients, it became about teamwork, it became about culture. And then it's so funny how these small nudges make big impacts. It was not too far from here. I was renting in Douglas and decided that I had a winter free to myself and did a adult education course in sports psychology.
Right.
And I was fascinated for 10 weeks.
Right.
Fascinated by the discussions.
So was the evening courses
evening
in
course
the Douglas
in Douglas Community School.
Yeah,
exactly.
Very cool, yeah.
And so did it for 10 weeks and just loved it. 3 hours every Monday. And it just piqued my interest. And it was the following September that I signed up for a master's degree then in psychology at UCC. And since then it's kind of snowballed.
Right.
So I managed to change jobs within the bank to kind of cultural people leadership development piece, which was a brilliant trial and training ground for me to learn my craft, and have since gone out on my own into that consulting world. So when you're asking about my preference between leadership development and high performance teams, I find that you can segregate all of them, but actually I just love working with people.
Yeah.
And the one-to-one piece is really good because we can bring it down to that context. And then when we're talking about a team or a cultural piece, it's fascinating just to watch the dynamics at play. And exactly that, how can you make the smallest subtle changes to the environment and watch big impacts take place?
Fascinated as well, though, where have you ever kind of looked back and maybe doing values work on yourself, where the actual spark came from for this kind of understanding why people do what they do, or how to help them? Any kind of origins, do you think, in it?
Yeah, like an awful lot of reflection done on that, like, and it's kind of like that nature versus nurture thing. So very, very blessed with my home life, and there was always a huge emphasis placed on learning. And so we were fed with books from an early age, and I absolutely loved the autobiography piece from early teenage life and finding out about what made high performers tick. And of course, when you're wearing the starry-eyed goggles of a 13-year-old, they become your heroes. So you're kind of thinking, here's a couple of lessons that I can try to apply to my own life.
Right.
I think that's where it sparked it. Right. But obviously, as you mature and get older, you're having your own life experiences. So you're reflecting on, well, what's worked well in that context? What's tripped me up in another context? And you're constantly evolving. And then that's supported by that underlying piece about continuous learning. So are you going to all these different courses? Are you stretching yourself to chat to different people in different environments? And, can you just have that hunger for knowledge and see where it takes you effectively?
Yeah. Was it always, though, I think you might have answered it already, but that hunger for learning and passion for growth and personal development, helping others, when did that start becoming then clear on it becoming a career for you? You know, so you did the commerce and the masters, but it was really only around the time you did the sports piece,
well, I'd say late 20s, to be honest. I mean, was kind of chasing a sporting dream for early to mid 20s. And then to kind of see about, well, actually, what do I want for the rest of my career? I definitely know it's not in the bank. And so doing that values work, what's really, really important to me? And then therefore what industries would be sort of good for me to maybe tap into. And as I said, it was that initial interest in that sports psychology over that winter that just nudged me towards, I want a bit more of this. So to go from an adult education course into a master's degree. And I remember my first night in the master's degree having a serious case of the imposter syndrome. Sitting in this room where, you know, with experienced guidance counselors and people with psychology degrees. And when I came to introduce myself, it was just, I work in a bank and I like sport. And you're kind of thinking, I don't belong here at all. But you just find actually that was a huge lesson, is that you had an awful lot of life experience and a different perspective to the room. So as the degree kind of played out, you were getting to see the strengths and the benefits of that as well, you know? Yeah.
Interesting. Was there a moment when you decided or weighed up the decision to actually say, right, I'm going to sign up for the master's, the degree in psychology? And I'm asking because when I was doing my day job and then I did my own coaching diploma, I got a coach helping me try to get a promotion. And it was kind of during the work I did with him, he kind of said to me, it seems like you kind of figure this out yourself. I'm just, you know, here. Did you ever think of doing a bit of coaching yourself? And it was like, you know, a little bit of a aha moment. And then when I went into the coaching diploma, they gave us the reading list and I had probably read half the books as a hobby anyway. So it was like, this felt like a cheat almost, that now, again, I was project management, and there was a lot of counsellors and whatnot in there already. So it was a bit similar, but I didn't feel that I just felt almost that I was at home in a way of, I knew where I was meant to be at that time. Was there a conversation with somebody that gave you advice to go down that route? Was it a self-made decision?
Yeah, it was actually self-made. It was a case where I saw it, was really, really interested in it, and you actually had to do an interview to get into the Masters, and I answered the most important interview question completely wrong. They said, what's your understanding of coaching? And I said, absolutely simple. You tell people what to do.
Right.
And they said, no, that's not it at all. So I don't know what the selection criteria was, but I slipped through the net and got into it. But it was a case of, again, it was that hunger and thirst for knowledge. I said, I had a little bit of a taste, so I really want to explore this, and it would be lovely to be able to sit here and tell you that there was a grand plan. There wasn't. I kind of knew that if I just did the course and never did anything else with it, it would be a really, really rich learning experience. And whatever comes after that, let's just see. But going in consciously, it was a case of actually just trying to immerse myself in that world, and first of all develop my own self-awareness, and then see where it takes us then after that in terms of career.
Figure it out
exactly,
a little bit, yeah. Interested to know about when you finished the diploma, you went into the other role in the bank, you started kind of learning your craft, I guess. When you decided to step out and go out on your own, that's a challenge for a lot of people, be in whatever line of work they're doing, if they're becoming a consultant or an entrepreneur. What were the couple of things you did wrong or made mistakes when you came out in the first 12 months, a year, that you could do differently if you could?
Absolutely everything. I'll give you a checklist, no problem. But no, look, I think it's, and maybe it is part of that growth mindset piece, but if somebody sat me down and told me all the things to avoid, I probably still wouldn't have listened to them.
Yeah.
Do you know that kind of way? So I placed real value in gut instinct and learning by doing. So I've made all those mistakes, but they were all part of that growth process.
Yeah.
In terms of going back and redoing it all again, I suppose there is a piece around almost like refining what is it exactly that you do. But at the time I was kind of very consciously remaining open. So to actually have a bit of experience in a lot of those people development factors, and then narrowing the focus down to that leadership development, high performance teams, performance under pressure piece. Right. So again, you'd like to come to that point a bit quicker maybe, but at the same time I thought there was huge value in understanding, okay, what you don't want to do versus what you do want to do as well.
During it, did you have any process for kind of tracking the learnings and kind of reflecting on what you did wrong here and try to do it differently? I suppose some of the stuff you'd advise other people to do, how did you kind of apply it to your own work?
Yeah, so for me, the reflective log is absolute sacrosanct.
Right.
So no matter what decisions, no matter what projects or what clients I'm working on, there's always that framework for self-reflection, and so that constant development piece. So when I've looked back, and I've even told you the life story there, it is about that evolution piece, that adapting, knowing what's not working is probably more valuable than knowing what is working. Because I think the person sitting across from you or the team that you're working with, they're giving you direct feedback. You know what's landing, you know what's working, but then equally, you know things that aren't hitting the mark. And it's important to kind of come back, reflect. Okay, why did I choose that intervention? What went on? Was it the right tool at the wrong time, or was it just the wrong tool?
Right.
And so that constant evolution piece, I think, is really, really important in terms of refining your craft.
Was there anything that you found extremely difficult in those early days, be it on your own, be it through coaching? When anyone starts out coaching, some of the things you always hear from people is being okay with the silence, or not being able to, it being okay not being able to help the person, backing away. Anything come up around those areas? Massively
so, because I suppose we all get into this industry because of a burning desire to help people, knowing that when you're trying to help people, there's a sweet spot to that. Because when you're trying so hard to help the other person, then whose process is it?
Yes.
Is it all about you, or is it all about the other person? So there has to be a strict boundary there between how much you're willing to give and how much you're willing to back off. What's really landed for me over the last number of years is this concept of non-attachment. So really understanding that you know yourself, you know the process that you're going through, but you're not attached to any outcome. So the person across from you changing careers or making a life-changing decision, that's theirs. It's not yours.
Yeah.
So I think that's been a really, really powerful sort of shift actually in my outlook on coaching.
Okay, very good. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of the work you're doing more now, and as it relates to individuals and teams. In the EQ framework, we talk about interpersonal and intrapersonal, right? So they're looking internally, the self-awareness, and then they're looking with the teams that they work with. How has, I suppose, that become your major focus? And maybe talk a bit about the work you're doing in that space.
Yeah, so I suppose very lucky early on in my consultancy, I got linked in with a crowd in the UK called Mindflick, and they're a collection of sport and performance psychologists, and they've built out a framework from all their years' experience in elite sport and in corporate consultancy as well. And with that framework, I found it to be such a connection with my own values that it's something that I've kind of used now in my own practice. And it is just about that self-awareness piece. So knowing your own preferences. Right. Where do your strengths lie? Where do your motivations, your drivers lie? And then when do your strengths tip over to becoming weaknesses? And then where are your blind spots? Right. So if that's our number one starting point with an individual or a team, that can be massively powerful depending on where their self-awareness journey is. Right. Because then what happens is that you have a total appreciation for where your strengths lie. And then you have an appreciation then for there's actually development areas here that you can take your performance to the next level. Okay. On a team basis, it's quite interesting in that when we understand our own preferences, that we can start valuing each other a bit more. We now know what you're bringing to the table. You know what I'm bringing to the table. We can appreciate each other a bit more. So I think step one on any sort of journey like that is that self-awareness piece. Okay.
And maybe just for folks that are hearing self-awareness, and I think I read recently that 90% of people are convinced they're very self-aware, but 10% are, the rest of them actually aren't, so you probably invert that. In your own self-awareness journey, you mentioned values. How did you kind of figure out what your own value set were? Had you your own process to kind of get there that, obviously takes a lot of reflection?
Yeah, so lucky enough, the master's program in UCC was hugely focused on that self-awareness piece. Right. So again, it wasn't that ethereal, theoretical research framework. There was an awful lot of self-reflection logs. And I remember doing one for the first time going, this is really, really hard. Yes. Never had to be that introspective before. And then it became a matter of course. It's like any skill. Yeah. It's a practice element of it. Even videoing coaching sessions, looking back, reflecting on that, again, is for somebody who's coming to that for the first time, hugely powerful stuff. Yeah. And so really I would be very thankful to the learning methodology that's in there to say that actually it gave me a huge sense of who I was. So when you're coming out at the end of the program, not only do you have the piece of paper, which is grand, but actually you know who you are, what you're about, where your strengths lie, where your weaknesses lie, where your blind spots you need to cover off with. Right. So I think a brilliant launch pad to step into the world that you have done 2 years of that real rich, reflective, practice.
Right. So doing that, again, bringing it forward to the spotlight and Mindflick, it sounds like that has really given you already a foundation for what Mindflick and Spotlight is focused on. It sounds very similar really, but it's done in a shorter time frame and it's done more with organisations and sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, I suppose number one, what you're trying to do is you're trying to develop a sense of humility in individuals and teams. Just once you unlock that piece that there's no monopoly in reality, that there is other ways to see the world, I think that's a real rich learning piece for any sort of individual or team. And as I said, that would really align with my own values piece as well. And so once you get humility as that foundation, that bedrock, then you can tap into curiosity. So when you're in that zone, now I'm curious to see how you see the world, because it's different to how I see the world. And with that sort of collaboration flows, solutions flow, and you're seeing that performance being elevated to a higher level. then at the top of the pyramid, then you're just seeing that celebration and amplification of diverse thinking and diverse behaviours. So with that, I suppose, again, there's a framework in there just to allow individual and teams just take their performance to higher levels.
Okay. So the vulnerability piece then, or the humility you mentioned, how, I suppose, if people are listening, they're probably saying, ask them, how does one become a bit more humble or vulnerable and for it to be okay to be that way? Is there techniques that you go through in the training to kind of help with that?
So I think what we do is you would have seen the behavioral styles framework. It's quite common. So, and it's as old as time. Like, I mean,
is that DISC or one of those or something?
Like that. So there's a behavioral styles framework within Spotlight called Flex.
Okay.
So one of the underpinnings of Spotlight is, one, it's based on the science of adaptability, hence the acronym Flex.
Right.
And then with Flex, you're looking at 4 different behavioral styles. So it's asking you, are you more task focused? Or are you more people focused?
Right.
So how do you make decisions? Are you more a thinker or feeler?
Okay.
And then what's your world like? Are you more sort of internal focused, that rich internal world, or external focused? So need those external stimulus. And with that, you have 4 behavioral styles: forceful, that real action orientated piece; logical, more internal, process driven; empathic, people caring; and expressive, that outgoing social piece. So the humility piece you asked me about, they're basically lenses in how you view the world. So by asking people pointed questions to pull them into different areas of the framework, you're beginning to see that there's different ways to see the world.
Right.
And so I know that if you're talking about something through a forceful frame and you're struggling with it, by asking you a question that makes you tap into the logical side of things, or makes you tap into the empathic or the expressive side of things, I'm now developing your ability to see that there are other ways to see the world.
And I'd imagine that's uncomfortable for people that are, you've probably seen people to say, I'm very empathetic, or I'm very humble or vulnerable, but it's very obvious that they're probably not, right? And this is shining that light in a way, I suppose, making them uncomfortable. How do you kind of help them be comfortable or more comfortable with it? I
think it's all about I suppose a fundamental part of coaching is that rapport building. So making it safe. And the other thing is just the empowerment of the framework means that there's no blame attached to anything. It's saying that this is here to solve a problem. So one of the sort of the core principles of Spotlight would be that it's a strengths-based tool. So you know that if you are in your sweet spot, things are flowing for you. You don't need my help. If things aren't flowing so well for you, if you're encountering problems, well, you're probably just overdoing your preference.
Right.
And so you're experiencing the downside of that value, that strength. And so what we're doing then is just allowing us a framework to problem solve. Okay. So, if you're looking at the world through a forceful frame, you're going to see every problem through competition, through ambition, through driving standards, all that piece. But actually, if you were able to drop that frame and tap into one of the other frames, that's where the solutions generally fall out.
Interesting. So what went off for me there is the different frames. Yeah. If somebody's naturally in one of the frames, is it harder for them to look at through different lenses than another? So if you're saying if somebody's in the forceful, are they very rooted in that and it's more difficult to get them to look at other things versus somebody in another frame that might be a bit more naturally inward feeling and sensing that they can look at things differently? Then is there within those profiles how does it play out and how easy is it for certain ones to adapt? So really I suppose the whole thing is that we're much less interested in where you start. So where your starting frame is, we're far more interested in where you can get to. Right. So what's really empowering about it, through all their research around elite athletes and CEOs, there's no sort of overload. There's no to say to be a champion, you need to be in that forceful frame. Okay. They start from all the 4 frames, but then it's a case of when are they be able to adapt and shift. And so I think when you're talking to somebody with a problem, you know that they are struggling to adapt, they're struggling to shift. Right. And by being able to just gently move them around that framework, that's when you find success, and that's when you find high performance, by being able to shift and adapt. Okay. the challenge with some of that, I find, is the being aware. You know, when you're doing the training, you're doing it, and afterwards, that CEO might be a month later in a meeting, and they've forgotten some of the maybe triggers that they're flipping into that, and they're just, I suppose, impulse control is gone or whatever. Is there tools or ways for them to bring themselves back into the moment to notice I'm actually slipping into the wrong quadrant here? How can I do that? What maybe things do you help them with to kind of notice that?
Yeah, I think if it's in a team environment, I think safety is really, really important. So being able to share each other's profiles is really, really important, to say, here, listen, this is me in my sweet spot. You'll see it. This is me when my sweet spot is slightly slipping into a weakness. So call me on it.
Right.
Tell me when I'm actually just tipping over the edge here.
Yeah.
So can you actually use almost that buddy system in a team position, knowing that we're all human, we're all fallible. It's impossible to stay in that sweet spot for 100% of the time.
Yeah.
In terms of yourself, it's actually about that self-regulation piece. So a real core part of emotional intelligence is actually just being able to judge the mood in the room, being able to judge the communication, and being able to have that thoughtful practice to understand that if I need to land a message, can I spend a small bit of time thinking about how I might craft it, rather than just default natural style and one size fits all.
Diving in, which tends to be probably the more likely approach. I'm looking forward to doing the course, right? So when we put this out, I know if we've already done it, looking back, I'm sure it went well, but you have lots more coming up over the year. I've just finished the online assessment, or there's the questionnaire. I don't know if it's the right terminology. That's based in a lot of research, I would imagine. Do you know much about how that's put together, the data that they've used for that? And I suppose, just like any assessment in EQ frameworks, is it different to others that you're aware of? Yeah,
so the behavioural styles that we just talked about, the flex, so that's based on the big 5 personality traits. Okay. So it's fairly rigorous. It's one of those ones that have lasted the test of time. Right. And there's a huge amount of personality research behind it. What's different about Spotlight is that it does talk about adaptability. So rather than just being fixed in one of those quadrants, we know that if you analyze social psychology over the last number of years, it'll tell you that your personality is shaped 70% by the environment. Okay. So that's why it's important to be adaptable, because of course you're all of these behaviors. So that's one piece. The second part that we hadn't picked up on was Spotlight also looks at what's driving the behavior. So if you look at that iceberg model, so it's very clear to pick up on an observable pattern of behaviors above the iceberg, but we don't really know what's driving it. Right. So it also looks at mindset. So it looks at this theory called reinforcement sensitivity theory, and that basically is a study done on the reward and threat sensitivities in the brain. Okay. And so that basically gives us, again, a profiling tool to see what's your preference in terms of mindset and how is that driving your behavior. So with that, there are 2 pretty rigorous research papers to back that up. Right. And then what's, I suppose, most gratifying, because that evidence-based practitioner is quite important to me, is that Mindflick have also done validated research on the tool. So it is statistically valid. It's gone through research papers, and again, it just adds that level of authenticity that's out there. Right.
Very important, I guess, to have that statistical significance in there, right?
Yeah, hugely so, because otherwise you risk the challenge back of, this is just like star signs. That kind of way. So for me as a practitioner, evidence base is really, really important. And I think if you're to stand behind a rigorous performance program, I think you need that for authenticity. And so again, it just means that you're able to stand up and confidently deliver your message effectively.
Yeah, very interesting. The whole area of mindset, Carol Dweck, isn't it, is where it kind of originated from. So like what areas within the work of Spotlight is there around mindset, and do you dive into it? Do you look at tools to change that? Anything you can share on that?
So it's another framework basically. So it looks at your sensitivity to both reward and threat, and it uses the acronym COPE. So how do you cope better under pressure? How do you cope with your decisions? How do you cope with stressors?
Right.
And we know that all of those are very, very key and important to performance. So if you take them through, so the contained mindset, C, so that's basically, can we be cool, calm, and measured?
Right.
Optimistic, when do we need to tune into reward? Prudence, when do we need to look out for threat? And engaged, when can we be really tuned in and see what's shifting? So again, the philosophy behind it is that we're much less interested as to where your preference lies and more interested in where you can actually tap into when the need arises. Okay. So all 4 of those are hugely valuable towards performance. Right. And to reach that high performance, you're going to need to be able to tap into all 4 of those when the context
So if
arises.
Right now I said to you, which one of you, if you were to say that you're in an interview, you're probably, at the point where it's automatic, right? Yeah. You're probably well versed in it. But if you were to say, where would you be in that kind of, is that how could you apply it to this situation, for example?
Yeah, absolutely could. So to my preference mindset of share my profile, which is optimistic. And anybody who knows me, friends, they will see that come across. I have this sort of giddy character that it'll all work out. Right.
Seems now, to be anyway.
That's, exactly, yeah. But that's really, really good. And it's great for a startup business.
Yes.
And it served me very, very well. But it also blows me up all the time. Okay. So if I just sat in that optimism, I would be really placing a cap on my performance. Okay. So at the moment, what I'm trying to be is contained. Okay. Cool, calm, measured, and getting my point across. Okay. I hope I'm there, Rob.
Yeah, I think so. We can edit it anyway.
Exactly, yeah. And then I suppose leading up to this, I suppose there's an element of prudence here. So I have to have my notes, have to have my prep work, have to have my research piece to make this piece as impactful as possible. So again, if you just sit in one singular mindset, you're not going to be able to get there. Right. And I think the analogy we always use when we're talking about mindset is, if we were to go and climb Mount Everest, could you get there with only 1, 2, or 3 of those mindsets? The answer is you probably wouldn't. Right. So you're going to need all 4 of them at different stages of the mountain to get to the top. Okay. Now, we all have our own Everest analogy. We all have our own personal and professional goals that we want to chase after. And what we're doing is, this is shining a light on, here, things that are going to work really well for you naturally. Yeah. But there's a pot of gold here for you as well, that if you're able to tap into that, you'll take your performance to the next level, and you might just reach the top of your own Everest.
Cool. Good analogy. So effectively, if somebody's listening and they have, I don't know, an interview coming up or a presentation coming up or something that is making them a little bit uncomfortable, or maybe they're very comfortable about, but maybe in they're almost too comfortable about it. If they looked at framework and applied it from those 4 angles to be prepared for it better, they'd come in a more rounded position for it, right?
Yeah, you're looking at the scenario, you're looking at the situation from a full rounded point of view, rather than from just your preferences. And what's really, really empowering about it is you can actually challenge back and say, pressure and stress is a choice. So rather than something that's done onto you, pressure and stress becomes a choice, because here you have a framework to navigate your way out of pressure and stress. Then it becomes down to a thing of, well, are you willing to go there, or are you willing to accept the consequences of pressure and stress? That can be hugely empowering for people.
Yeah. So as a prep, knowing you're going into an environment where there could be pressure and stress, you can do your homework beforehand to be, is that how you're looking at, to be less stress or less pressure, because you're more confident with the work you've done, you'll be in a more comfortable position?
Exactly. So the whole thing is that you put the 2 frameworks together. So if I was to give you my profile, on the Flex framework, I come across as expressive, hugely people-focused, really interested in connection and kind of that social animal piece. And then the optimism piece is my mindset. So that's my combination. So expressive optimism works really, really well when I'm presenting, when I'm in front of a team or in front of individuals, because it means I can build that connection. It means that I can give that bit of positivity. So where that gets overdone is sometimes I miss the sort of the small details, and sometimes I'm overly optimistic, so it can take blind risks. So if you're to use those 2 frameworks, what happens when I get under pressure? I tell everybody how busy I am, and that I'm seriously under pressure. I have got 1,000,001 things to do, and I get quite emotional about it.
Right.
And so if I was to look at the least position where I go to in the spotlight framework is logically contained.
Right.
So to maneuver myself out of pressure, what do? Is I sit down with a notebook and I write down my to-do list. So being very contained, facts and figures, what's there actually there to do.
Right.
And then logical, just plan my week.
Right.
And so it's not the natural place for me to go. I hate doing it, but that's a way for me to engineer myself out of pressure. Right. So it becomes that choice piece again, which is quite empowering.
Cool. Do you find that gets easier the more you do it then, that part, or is it always that Sunday night, should I have to do this for half an hour here to prepare my week? Has it improved? Is it a skill you can develop?
Absolutely. So it's back to that duet growth mindset piece, and tapping back into that the evolution of social psychology, which says that personality can actually change with volitional effort.
Right.
So if you want to work on something like that of being more logical, then absolutely, it's a practice, it's a skill.
Yeah.
So the more you do it, the more effective you are at it. And so again, quite empowering, because some people come at the frame of, well, this is just me. This is my personality. There's nothing much I can do about it. Right. Actually not true, that with volitional effort, that piece can actually shift. And
it's momentum building then, really, isn't it? Like exactly. You can see the compounding interest of it improving, and it all gets a little bit better as you go. Interesting stuff.
I dare not say 1% better.
I've said it too many times on this, so I left it out on purpose there. That's a lot of individual reflection and development, but bringing it to teams then, right? So how can you improve teams? And I did a lot of research and work on, the idea of a group versus a team versus a high-performing team and how they're different. Just from your perspective, working with teams, maybe talk a bit about that and how this can help with the teams then.
Yeah, so in terms of profiling a team, it's quite interesting because I suppose anytime you go into a sports environment or a corporate environment, you normally have a performing team.
Right.
So they're performing at some level. What you're trying to do is you're trying to blow the doors off in terms of where can we actually get to here. And it's back to that self-awareness piece as being the bedrock of it. And an interesting story just on that COPE framework. One of the pieces of work that I did with a tech startup last year, we were profiling mindset.
Right.
And just before I went into the room to do the bit of work with the team, now they'd grown massively over 3 years. There was 5 on the leadership team. And just before I went into the room, the managing director caught me with the elbow and said, there's one guy in the room and he could derail the session. Let me deal with him.
Right.
Said, okay, fine. And so when we got to the profiling piece on mindset, what did we see? We saw 4 people in the room on that optimistic side of things. And we saw 1 lone voice on the prudent side of things.
Right.
So who do you think the guy who was going to blow up the session? He was wrongly labelled as the prudent guy. So when we were able to unpack what that actually meant was that because there was that 4 optimistic mindset at play, it meant that the team was very comfortable taking risks, was growing massively, was hugely optimistic. And then there was 1 lone voice saying, hang on guys, we need to think about this a bit more. Yeah. And through the session, what actually came is he became, rather than the pain in the ass, became the most valuable person in the room.
Right.
Because he was seeing things that they weren't seeing and was potentially going to stop the company from blowing up.
Yes.
So from a team perspective, that self-awareness piece is massively important.
Yeah. Because bias comes probably massively in there, that those 4 were probably, potentially looking at this guy as holding them back, right? And maybe because they're working closely together, there's this unconscious bias that he's not maybe adding value.
Yeah.
And it's to unravel that. As you said, the self-awareness work is so important from that perspective.
Absolutely.
Was there anything specific tools-wise that they had to do to kind of help unpack that in the session? Is there anything that comes up there?
Yeah, so I suppose one of the concepts we use with the with teams is this concept of the empty chair. So Amazon's empty chair, basically.
Yes, yeah.
So what's missing from this team? What are we not covering when we're just naturally talking? And so obviously I was talking about that team of 5, 4 on the optimistic side, 1 on the prudent side. actually had to maybe just step into both contained and engaged as well to make sure the team was making that fully rounded decision.
You were jumping into that role?
So basically, I was helping them basically to cover off that blind spot. And very simply, it just meant that can we have a couple of priming questions at the end of every meeting agenda to force them into those spaces, to make sure that they're covering off those angles, to make sure they're making more rounded decisions.
If a leader, so the leader in that team, was the leader in that team as well? Or were they all at the same?
No, there was managing director and the leadership team.
So he was
part
the perceived leader as well.
Correct,
so the dynamic then, if your leader's there and your leadership team are there, how difficult do you find that sometimes for them to come to the same level? Or maybe ask the leader to leave sometimes. Is that a better option? I don't know.
I don't think so. Because, I mean, yes, I ask the leader to leave, but what happens when I leave? The leader's back in the room with their own biases and agendas. So I think that collaborative process is hugely important. Number one, working with teams, psychological safety is the big thing for me. And I won't go anywhere without having that as the foundation.
Can you tell a mile away when it's not there?
Yeah. You ask one question and you see people with the darting eyes and the shifting uncomfortably in
What
their
would
seats.
the question be, potentially?
Basically, if you ask that difficult question about, who's holding the team back here?
Right.
Because everybody are looking at it through a different frame.
Yeah.
So can you actually open up and say, well, Rob, I think you're too slow paced at meetings because I don't value your methodical ways. But now if I can raise my awareness and say, actually, Rob, what you're bringing to the team is hugely valued.
Yeah.
Then there's a sort of a disconnect. But if I can't say it, then it'll never come up onto the table and I'll always have that, wrong view of you.
Yeah.
Not to say that you're slow.
No. I get it totally, but there's a fear of saying something to, I suppose, have a negative effect on it. But when you don't have that safety, is that like do you typically go in with setting ground rules in a session that everybody has to abide by? Is there some standard starting points?
It's back to my whole belief on the whole evidence-based practitioner piece.
Right.
So I actually try to give the neuroscience behind it.
Right.
To say that, this is a very, very primal thing.
Yeah.
That, back in those caveman times, if you did anything that risked you from being ejected from the tribe, it meant certain death.
Yeah.
That's actually at play in the boardroom as well.
Right.
So what's going on is when you're asking a difficult question and the brain is screaming, don't answer that question. The brain is actually saying, don't answer that question or you'll be ejected from the tribe and you'll die. So there's a bit of sort of humor involved in that, that you can actually just bring a bit of playful curiosity to it. So I think, framing questions of, putting on sort of kind of thought experiments, the kind of the de Bono's thinking hats, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's just for argument's sake. Let's throw this scenario. What might happen? And it might just open the door, but what you're doing is you're getting a window into the real life practices that are going on.
How do you get those kind of practices or behaviors to stay after you're gone? To kind of make that stick. Like any coaching session or any of that training, it's great when it's happening, but everybody goes back to the day job and the habits kind of unless they're broken, over time. How do you manage to keep the change and the adaptability in place?
Yeah, and look, I suppose it's a great question because my ideal success is to make myself redundant.
Right.
Which sounds a bit counterintuitive. But if I've done my job properly, then I shouldn't be needed anymore.
Okay.
And I would, if I'm working with a leadership team or even a sports team, it is about real intensive work early doors to build that foundation. It is exactly as you said about the contracting piece. And then it is about having that real healthy tension between challenge and support.
Right.
So knowing this is going to be uncomfortable, knowing that behavioural change, cultural change is really uncomfortable, but can we support you in doing that? And it's remaining that healthy tension. And I think it comes back to relationships though. So I think once you can build those strong relationships with all those key stakeholders, then you can really sort of drive the agenda. And because you're almost like an outsider consultant, you don't have to worry about the politics. You don't have to worry about internal agendas or anything like that. You can ask the question and you can actually just hold a mirror up to what's happening and you can call that out. And so sometimes it can be really, really useful because I can maybe throw something into the room, something that you've been thinking for 3 years, and finally it's out onto the table, and now we can discuss it, you know. So I think it is about challenging, supporting, and I suppose really once they start to see tangible benefits, they're more likely to continue it on themselves.
And the word trust is always very
hugely
connected in there. I think emotional intelligence and trust, while they're kind of bed partners in a way, right? Or there's foundations, one to the other. Where does trust come into the framework, and is there any activities or work to help foster trust, or, you know, break down the barriers to start proper trust coming?
Yeah, you're going to laugh at this, like, but one of my first exercises that I do with any team is to try to make them fall in love.
Okay. That's not this falling back thing, is it?
No, not at all, no.
Right, okay.
I've seen that go horribly wrong. I would stay away from that.
Safety for that one.
Yeah. So it's that Professor Aaron Arthur. So over in San Francisco, he had a lifetime's work on human intimacy, relationships, team cohesion. You may have seen the experiment where he asks you to go through 36 questions, 3 levels of intimacy. Level 1, what's your favorite colour? Level 2, starting to get to know you a bit. And level 3 is the real core of you.
Okay.
And then to look at each other in the eyes for 4 minutes. And that's,
just without saying anything, is it, that exercise? Okay.
Yeah. And so that's basically supposed to try to foster a romantic connection.
Right.
Now, his original study on romantic connection, it didn't actually play out, but what it did do was it had a profound effect on connection.
Okay.
And so once you can get there, and it's a great exercise to do. I don't always do the 4 minutes staring into your eyes. That can make people feel a bit uncomfortable. But the questions,
right? And
what's really, really interesting is that some groups are so into it and think it's brilliant and have no problem answering all the questions, versus you go to another group and it's locked down, shut down. And it's a really interesting sort of line in the sand, and a great piece to start with, because it just shows you where we're at. What's the job of work that we have ahead of us.
Okay. And for the groups that are locked down, just don't want to do it, has that been an indicator of low trust in the group, or that's the reason they don't want to do it?
Yeah. So low trust in the group, not wanting to go there in terms of vulnerability, and I think low levels of psychological safety. So for me, what it says is that, okay, the foundation stone here has to be about developing psychological safety. So we've been talking about emotional intelligence. If I go in with my off-the-shelf leadership team development package and just want to roll that out for 6 months, grand, I might be having a great time, but is it making any impact? So I think it's always very useful just to get in there on the first session. Let's see where we are, and then let's map out the roadmap. So obviously you'd have a certain framework, but I think you're talking about impact, and you're talking about leaving a lasting impact. I think the more bespoke, the more tailored it can be for those teams' needs, the more chance it has of landing and it being successful.
Very interesting. One other area just on the framework and just some of the tools, problem cleaning. I saw that mentioned. Maybe talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
so it's based on this piece around the George Bernard Shaw quote, who said, "I learned long ago never to wrestle with pigs. You get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it."
Right.
So this is really about pig wrestling. And these are that no matter what our preferences are, we invite certain problems into the world, and we tend to get down and dirty with them, and we wrestle with them.
Right.
We all have them. Things that you've been trying to fix for years, things that keep coming back up and biting you in the ass. They're all existent in our lives. So what we need to do is clean the pig. Okay. And so it's based a lot on the Austrian philosopher Wittgenstein, who says that the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And so if you're taking those two spotlight frameworks, that's basically your language. So Rob, if you're sitting across from me describing a problem, you're going to describe them from your preferences. And so I'm sitting here, I'm absolutely benevolently involved, but I'm also quite apathetic, because I know you're just describing the problem from one frame. Once we can start getting you to see through a couple of different frames, solutions start to fall out. We're starting to clean our pig.
Right.
And all of a sudden, again, we're released, our performance increases.
Yeah, well, very good. Yeah, no, something's triggered off. I'm just looking at a book here. Where is it? There's this book called Simple Habits for Complex Times. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, I know it, yeah.
And they talk about in that feedback and how important feedback is. And it was a similar kind of framework that, this whole feedback sandwich and all of that.
Yeah.
But really, when you're giving feedback on that person from your perspective of how you see it, as opposed to really inviting them to give. I know they're doing their self-appraisal and stuff, but it's making it much more two-way, or looking at it from different perspectives to do that, and that helps maybe individuals overcome their own performance problems, I suppose, as well.
Hugely so as well. But I mean, again, about knowing yourself and knowing your team, once you understand people's preferences, you can start tailoring your communication towards them. Mm-hmm. So I know if you have a logical preference, that any sort of feedback that I give you needs to be quite detailed, needs to be quite analytical. There needs to be a logic and a rationale to it, and there needs to be a process to it. Yeah. So again, if I was to just, address my team and give feedback just according to my preferences, again, I'll feel great about it. But has my message really landed? Yeah. So it's back to that impact piece again. And again, underpinning all of this is that emotional intelligence. Yeah. The one size fits all approach doesn't work. And that fixedness that we've talked about there, that rigidity, tends to be sort of the enemy of performance, really. Yeah. Because what you're effectively saying is that I'm going to sit on my preferences and I'm going to wait till the world lines up. Then I'll be magic.
Yeah. That'll come around.
It'll happen.
Interesting. I do a lot of emotional capital reports, the ECR. I don't know if you're aware of that assessment. And I did about 25 in the course of a week recently, and I found just through doing them over the years. But in this week, I was kind of having a session with somebody, reading their report, and it just wasn't adding up. Like this person was presenting and talking about certain competencies that, looking at the report, were low, but looking at the report were high, but they were coming across as low. And then something just triggered, and I looked back at the report, and I was actually looking at the wrong person's report. So when I actually then went to the right person's report, it all matched up without, so I could really sense the correlation between what was on the report and the person. So I could almost have said, right, this person, just without looking at the report, would have been on this scale of straightforwardness and whatnot. Have you got to the stage now through your experience with your Spotlight that you can, almost just from talking to somebody, kind of place them into the different categories?
Yeah, absolutely. You can see it coming through, and you can see what's happening in terms of our communication and how you're talking about different problems, how you're talking about your outlook on life, that you get a sense of that. I think the real important part, and it's massive for me, is not to box you in. Mm-hmm. Because we're rich, complex human beings. We're all of these things. Yeah. And so, it's interesting to see what's coming across the table now, and it can make an assessment of that. But knowing then as well that if we're to take that piece about the environment being 70% influential on the personality, knowing that our chat here in a different environment, different sides of you and different sides of me may come out. And so it's nice to be able to yes, absolutely get an instinct as to where somebody might lie, because that helps frame your communication a bit better. But you need to be careful about, I suppose, this phenomenon called premature evaluation, right? That you've just basically fixed somebody, and aware of it, and what you're doing is you're placing an awful lot of limits on our relationship, and I'm placing a lot of limitations on you as a person as well in terms of your growth potential.
Sure, and I suppose multiple things. This idea of sub-personalities as well. It's, if you have a personality for work, you might have a totally different one doing this versus, as you said, in the pub or playing on a football field. And you might be an introvert versus an extrovert in different settings, or, somewhere in between, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. And the guys over Mindfreak, they always reference a really quiet, shy, timid, polite boxer. And knowing that works really well to him, because he's a fantastic, supportive teammate. But in the ring, that's probably not likely going to help him. And so when that context shifts, this different animal comes out, and a champion comes out, an Olympic gold medalist comes out. And that's just showing the abilities and the capabilities of being adaptable.
Very, very cool. So as you're getting more involved in Spotlight, I think there's, from reading on it, there's a Spotlight X coming soon. Is there new stuff coming out all the time in this framework from Mindflick? So
that's the real exciting part of it, is that it is at this very embryonic stage, and it's growing quite rapidly. So what they do have is that pig wrestling chapter to it. Okay. What's coming out now is a Spotlight Youth. So to have that piece for the kind of the 13 to 17-year-old market.
So needed, because there's nothing done, I would imagine. When I went to school, I think I was probably 30 before I heard the term emotional intelligence and kind of understood what it was about, so tapping in at a younger age would be huge.
So hoping for it to be really, really powerful that way, to just start that self-awareness journey. Exactly the same as you, Rob. Before I entered that psychology master's degree, I had nothing in terms of my preferences and my emotional intelligence. And there's also a piece called Spotlight Teams, which basically puts a metric on how your team is performing. So it's that real hard-edged performance tool for your team. Yeah. And that's really for that cutting-edge performance piece. And it's to be used as a kind of a team development plan, but also that retest piece as well. Yes. So again, a very practical element there.
That's important, because doing research on the different assessment tools from an emotional intelligence spectrum, there's not much on teams. It's all very individual based, and then you can look at each individual's report and figure out how, but if it's a pure team lens, that'll be quite unique, I'd say.
It is quite unique, and it's some of the case studies coming out of it are really fascinating, because there's kind of no hiding place. Like there's a score on psychological safety, and there's a score on the different dynamics, and it's trying to build out the safety and build out the dynamics, and building a very conscious action plan, knowing that in 3 months' time, this is being retested. So people are on the hook for it. So therefore, you're driving performance, you're driving team development.
And you're finding like human resources or chief people officers getting very much involved in this, and that they would tie the score of psychological safety to performance appraisals and I suppose ultimately pay and bonuses and things like that. Like if you're measured at the start of January, in 6 months' time when you do it again, if that's not going up, you're going to be held, as a leader accountable. Yeah,
so that's very much organizational specific, really, in terms of how they want to drive that behavior piece. What we're saying is that there's very clear and tangible performance benefits for doing so. In this sort of metric driven society, here's a tool that'll help you actually, rather than having it being this ethereal concept of team dynamics and team performance, can we put a measure on it?
Yes.
And so really it's to make people have a very conscious focus on how the team is actually interacting, as opposed to what the kind of financial results might be. Knowing that one impacts the other, but the sole focus tends to be just on financial results output.
No, very interesting. Sounds like really exciting space to be in, right? I'm looking forward to doing the 2 days even more now. You probably have me read at this stage, so it'd be interesting to see what comes out of that. I probably know some similar myself, but just from your own perspective, always interested in tapping into people that are interested in self-development and learning. What's the most, I suppose, fascinating thing you've learned in the last 6-12 months yourself that has made you better, has improved you? Anything? Putting you on the spot there. You're looking at me.
I'm under the spotlight, as it were. So for me, I think there was two bits that I've probably mentioned in this interview. One was that concept of non-attachment. So knowing that you actually have the confidence to stand up and deliver your message, and not having the sole focus on outcome. So that's hugely empowering. And the other bit was that pressure and stress is a choice. Now, managing and engineering yourself out of that can be uncomfortable. But it's a damn sight better than suffering with that pressure and stress piece. So both of those are actually hugely empowering messages that have landed for me. And I can see in terms of my own performance, well-being, satisfaction, that has just rocketed from those two key insights. But I suppose I mentioned earlier on that it is constant evolution. So I'd be very disappointed that if I was sitting back in this chair in 2 years' time and I was still at the same level and I had no new insights for you, that would show real stagnation for me. So that optimism that I'm showing is I'm really excited about where I am, but I'm even more excited about where I'm going to get to, you know.
And that's the important to keep the drive and the motivation, absolutely essential. Just interested on either, what was there any action you've taken to be less attached or to work on the stress? What obviously the stress, I think you talked about maybe just planning your week and whatnot. On the attachment, because if somebody, maybe to draw a comparison, like if I was giving a presentation and I felt that the message didn't go down well and I'd have a negative self-talk and I'd feel like, shit, did I change? Should I, you know, so how to take that attachment away? What do you do to kind of work with that?
So it is the evolution of that self-reflection piece that I mentioned earlier. So heretofore, it would have been always about the outcome. How did it land? Did people enjoy it? Did people get something from it? And then trying to link my self-esteem to that.
Yes.
Like, so knowing that actually that's not always the case, and I can't sustainably actually hook a self-esteem on that, or my own competence as a practitioner on it. And to actually say, okay, rather than that outcome focused, really being that process focused. So what are the things that I'm doing to make sure that I'm on top of my game as a practitioner? So that constant rest, recovery, reflection, exercise, diet, sleep, constant learning, constant reflection, and the preparation piece that I mentioned earlier, that they're the pieces that I place my self-esteem on and my self-worth as a practitioner on. In terms of where the message lands, I'm quite comfortable to go in now and deliver something that doesn't land as effectively as maybe I might like it, but to give the feedback as to, okay, this is where the team is at.
Yes.
And this can be a starting point. It's a great self-awareness tool for both me and you as a leader. Here are the sort of recommendations that I would make to drive this team forward. And it's kind of then over to you to see, well, do you have the appetite to actually drive this on now?
Yeah. Interesting. Very cool. I just, again, last triggering, when I kind of give those talks and just talk about coaching, leadership groups, or whatever, I've recently started to just, with the very first slide, put a picture of the Dalai Lama up and said he's often been asked, how does he feel with the expectation when he's trying to deliver a discourse to 2,000 people and they all want to be enlightened? And it was from The Art of Happiness, the book. He said if he just narrows it down to one person, so he says if he has an impact on one person, he feels he's achieved his expectations are lower, and it takes a lot of the pressure off him. And I've kind of done that a few times lately, and it definitely helps, because it just helps you relax, and it's, you know, you're not attaching your delivery on everybody's, you know, you don't want everybody walking out there and, you know, doing whatever you say. So
yeah, and I think we talk about the humility piece, like, so to have an expectation that everybody in the room will agree with you is completely unhealthy. and doesn't show too much humility. So knowing that you're never going to get 100% approval rating, but that you know, it's a great way of looking at it is, can you there's a very good definition of life and saying, have you made one person breathe easier? And if that's that sort of singular focus that you were talking about there, that's not a bad way to approach life.
Makes life a bit simpler. And again, I think the guy referencing lots of different episodes here at the moment, but Barry Schwartz, The Power of Choice, it is The Power of Choice, isn't it? But that again helps so much when he says, just lower your expectations on whatever you're doing and you'll be happier in lots of ways. The Paradox of Choice is the name of the book. Great stuff, Declan. Thanks so much for sharing that. How folks can get more connected in with you, learn a bit more about Spotlight, Mindflick, give a shout out to your ways of connecting. And I love your new logo, by the way. I think that's really, really cool. It's a lot
of optimism.
A couple of times I had to check it, but I now know I can get the whole reading out of it. So
anything on LinkedIn, Declan O'Connell, on Twitter, at O'Connell Declan, or Instagram, Declan O'Connell Performance.
Very good. Great stuff. Thanks, Dec, for coming in.
Magic.
I'm glad we were able to do it.
Really appreciate it. Loved it.
Good
Thanks,
luck.
Rob.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.
Hey, folks. Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, could you please consider helping me extend the reach of the podcast that a little bit further? You can do that in a number of ways. The number one way is to subscribe on your app of choice. This helps me with the chart ranking, leading to more folks stumbling across the podcast and checking it out. You could also repost it on your social media channels. Any of them would be great. And maybe even tell a friend in person or over the phone. Pick up the phone, give them a call and tell them about the 1% Better podcast. Tell them about this episode or one that you've heard in the past. Any will do. I would really appreciate it. In the last year, we set up a 1% Better Slack community, which you can join for free and interact with me and other members of the community and improve through holding each other accountable and sharing monthly challenges. It's a lot of fun. Check it out. I'm into season 4 of this incredible journey, and the more of these interviews and solo shows that I research, record and share, the better I believe that they get, and more loaded with actionable takeaways that you can learn from. I know I've learned so much from it so far, and it's always really, really fulfilling and rewarding when I hear from you on what you took from it. So do reach out, rob@robofthegreen.ie. And of everybody that listens, 90% listen and enjoy, but only around 10% actually take action, write down takeaways and put them into practice. I am convinced that if we can move that number a bit higher, the listeners will not only make steps forward towards their goals, but they will be more fulfilled and happy and better. Change doesn't happen overnight. It is hard, but it's all about taking the first step, whatever that is for you. You can absolutely do this. Make a plan, be deliberate, take action. Don't overreach. Start with those small incremental improvements, and over time you will see great progress. It's all in the pursuit of betterness. So again, thank you so much for listening. Good luck and stay safe.